I never thought I'd be so grateful for installing those security cameras around my house. But those little things turned out to be the star witnesses in an incident that the whole neighborhood later called the Great Cedar Hollow Shed Burning Scandal. They weren't just ordinary gadgets meant to keep an eye on stray cats wandering around or the skateboard kids messing about in the yard. They captured every moment of a crazy story that turned our quiet suburban community into the center of a case no one saw coming. My name is Emily Harper, and this is the story of how the vendetta of the Homeowners Association HOA president against my shed renovation project turned into a serious crime, making the entire Cedar Hollow buzz on the local evening news. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the latest video. I live in Cedar Hollow, a small suburb in Oregon, where red brick houses and white wooden fences sit peacefully under the shade of towering pine trees. It's the kind of community you'd think only exists in books. Clean streets, neighbors greeting each other across front yards, and birdsong replacing the sound of car horns. My house isn't too big, but the backyard has an old shed I've always considered a treasure. It's been there for ages, since my grandmother was alive, with chipped roof tiles and wooden walls weathered by rain and sun. As a kid I'd sit in there, watching her carve wood, dreaming that one day I'd do the same. Now, having found some success as a wood sculptor, I decided it was time to turn the shed into my own workshop. The idea hit me after a busy year of work. I just finished a few big orders, curving coffee tables, tree-shaped bookshelves, and made a decent chunk of money from my freelance interior design gig. The shed was a mess, creaky windows, a floor rotting in spots and piled with dried-up paint cans no one bothered to clear out. But I saw potential in it. I wanted to replace the roof tiles, paint the walls a soft green to blend with the trees, and add big windows to let the light flood in. I pictured myself standing there, sanding wood, turning rough logs into art. Nothing too flashy, just a little corner to work in and reclaim some childhood memories. With the money I had, I figured it was the perfect time to give the shed a new look, a proper upgrade. But living in Cedar Hollow meant I couldn't just dive in without going through the HOA. This neighborhood has a homeowners association with a rulebook thicker than a brick, and I knew I had to follow the process if I didn't want trouble. I'm not the type to stir up drama. In fact, I always try to keep the peace with neighbors, so I spent hours preparing my application. I drew up detailed blueprints, picked eco-friendly materials, like recycled wood and non-toxic paint, even built a 3D model to prove the shed wouldn't ruin the neighborhood's charm. I wanted it perfect. New roof tiles, pale green walls, big windows, but still discreet, tucked behind the pine trees so no one could complain. When I submitted it to the HOA board, I thought it'd go smoothly. I had no idea that decision would spark a war with Margaret Voss, the new HOA president, who I was about to learn didn't just like controlling things. She had a weird grudge against me and my shed. Back then, I only knew a little about Margaret, a newcomer driving a shiny white SUV, always showing up with a fake smile and an iPad in hand. I figured she was just a bit uptight, the type to nitpick bushes or trash cans. But I was about to learn a lesson. Margaret didn't stop at complaints. She was willing to do anything, even burn the world down to protect what she called community standards. After deciding to renovate the shed, I knew the first step was getting approval from the Homeowners Association HOA. I didn't want any trouble, so I followed every rule in the thick handbook they give every resident when they move into Cedar Hollow. I spent weeks preparing my application. Detailed blueprints of the new shed with a gray tiled roof, walls painted soft green and big windows, a list of eco-friendly materials like recycled wood and non-toxic paint, even a 3D model I stayed up all night to finish on my computer. I wanted to prove the shed wouldn't hurt the neighborhood. It'd be hidden behind the pine trees, just a hint of gentle green peeking out from the street. I checked every line in the HOA handbook, from building height rules to fence setbacks, to make sure no one could find fault. When I submitted the application to the board, I thought I'd done enough to make it go smoothly. The HOA board meeting took place in the neighborhood's common room, a small space with plastic chairs lined up in rows and the faint smell of stale coffee in the air. I got there early, bringing my blueprints and 3D model, hoping to win them over right away. There were 5 board members, and I only needed a majority vote to get approved. When I presented my plan, upgrading the shed into a workshop, replacing the roof, adding windows, and painting it green, 4 of them nodded in agreement. Henry Sullivan, an old man who lives a few houses down from me, even smiled and said, "I like this idea, Emily. It brings some creativity to the neighborhood." The other 3 agreed too, praising me for following the rules and keeping the shed low-key. I started to feel relieved, thinking everything would be fine. But then Margaret Voss, the newly elected HOA president, spoke up, and things started going off the rails. Margaret sat at the head of the table, holding an iPad, her sharp eyes glaring at me over gold-rimmed glasses. She wore a pale gray business suit, looking more like she just walked out of a real estate office than a neighborhood meeting. As soon as I finished, she raised her hand, signaling everyone to hush, and started talking. "I don't think this shed fits Cedar Hollow," she declared, her voice steady but dripping with authority. "The soft green color you picked. It's too modern, too out there. Our neighborhood is a traditional American community, not some quirky artist enclave." I was stunned. I'd chosen green because it blended with the trees, not to stand out. I tried to stay calm, explaining again. "Margaret, I checked the HOA handbook. This color's on the approved list, and the shed will barely be visible from the street. I just want to improve it, not ruin anything." But Margaret wouldn't listen. She spent 15 minutes, the whole time arguing against it, her voice getting sharper. "Have you thought about how this green could lower the neighborhood's aesthetic value? Or how those big windows might ruin the neighbor's privacy? This isn't personal, Emily. It's about community standards." I wanted to snap that the shed was in my backyard, dozens of yards from the main road, but she didn't give me a chance. She kept going, insisting my project was a threat to Cedar Hollow, though she couldn't point to anything specific in the rules to back it up. The other 4 members started glancing at each other awkwardly, but no one dared interrupt her. I felt my blood boil, but I stayed quiet, knowing arguing right then would only make it worse. Finally, the board voted. 4 said yes, only Margaret said no. I let out a sigh of relief as I held the approval paper in my hands, thinking I'd cleared the first hurdle. I scheduled the work to start right after, hiring a small crew to replace the roof and paint the walls. As I left the meeting room, I glanced at Margaret. She was still sitting there, tapping on her iPad, her lips pressed into a tight line. I should have seen the warning signs in that cold stare, in how she clung to her opinion like it was law. The crew showed up the next week, bringing new gray tiles and cans of soft green paint I'd picked out. I stood in the backyard watching them measure and rip off the old roof, picturing my workshop taking shape. I thought the trouble was over, that Margaret, even if she wasn't happy, would have to accept the majority's decision. But I'd underestimated her. Just a few days after the work started, the first letters showed up in my mailbox, and I quickly realized Margaret had no intention of letting me be. The first letter came in a white envelope with the HOA logo, so official looking I thought it was a meeting notice. But when I opened it, I found a short line. "Your grass at 14 Elm Street is too tall, exceeding the 2-inch limit per section 4, 2.1. Please cut it immediately." It was signed with Margaret's scribbled signature in blue ink, complete with a tiny hand-drawn smiley face. I frowned, went out front to check. My grass wasn't even an inch tall, I'd just mowed it last weekend. I figured it was a mistake and let it slide. But then a second letter came, this time warning that my trash can lacks sufficient reflectivity under section 6, 1.3. I dug out the HOA handbook and sure enough there's no rule about trash cans needing to reflect. These letters were obviously ridiculous, but that little smiley face from Margaret bugged me, like she was playing a joke, only she got. I decided to beef up my defenses, installing a doorbell camera at the front gate, the kind the HOA handbook explicitly allows under section 9.5. I thought it'd give me peace of mind, especially with the crew banging away in the backyard. But right after, another letter arrived. "Surveillance equipment at 14 Elm Street is too visible from the street, violating section 9. 5.2 on neighborhood aesthetics." I checked the handbook again. Section 9, 5.2 only says devices can't pose a hazard, nothing about being too visible. This time I got mad. I called Henry Sullivan, the board member who'd backed me, to ask if something weird was going on. He sighed over the phone. "Emily, I think Margaret doesn't like your project. She brought it up at coffee this morning, saying you're ruining the neighborhood." I told her to drop it, but she wouldn't listen. The letters were just the start. When the crew began painting the shed walls, I noticed Margaret's shiny white SUV parked across the street every morning. She sat inside, sunglasses hiding half her face, tapping away on her iPad like she was listing my crimes. One time I caught her snapping photos of the crew from the driver's seat, the flash going off in the morning sun. I couldn't take it anymore and marched over to confront her. "Margaret," I said, keeping my voice steady, "what are you doing? The shed's been approved." She rolled down her window, flashing a smile so saccharine it made me sick. "Oh, Emily," she replied, her tone light as sugar. "I'm just documenting all the violations for next month's meeting, sweetie. Someone's got to keep up community standards." I was floored by her attitude. "Violations? I followed the rules." I shot back, but Margaret just smiled, a grin that sent chills down my spine. "You keep doing your thing," she said, emphasizing "you" like a warning, and I'll do mine." Then she rolled up the window, hit the gas, and drove off, leaving me standing there with a growing sense of dread. I went back home, checked the security cameras. Thankfully, they were still recording everything. At that point, I didn't know Margaret's harassment wouldn't stop at letters or photos. The renovation was still on track. The new gray tiled roof was installed, the soft green walls glowed in the afternoon sunlight, and the crew had just framed the big windows I'd dreamed of for so long. I stood in the backyard admiring the progress, feeling like all the tension with Margaret was starting to fade. She still sent warning letters, still parked her white SUV across the street to watch, but I told myself it'd be done in a few days, and she'd have no reason left to harass me. I was wrong. Margaret didn't just want to stop me, she wanted to destroy everything. I was working late, tweaking a design for a client, when I heard strange noises from the backyard, the low hum of a big vehicle, then heavy footsteps on the grass. I thought it might be stray cats rummaging through the trash again, so I didn't pay much attention. But then a sharp, acrid smell hit my nose, and my heart started pounding. I opened the security camera app on my phone, and what I saw nearly made me drop it. A small truck was parked in the alley behind my house, and right by the shed Margaret Voss, still in the designer tracksuit I'd seen her wear while spying on the crew, was holding a gas can, pouring liquid onto the wooden walls. I zoomed in, unable to believe my eyes. She muttered something, then pulled a lighter from her pocket and sparked it. Flames erupted instantly, licking up the green paint I'd chosen so carefully. I screamed, "No," and bolted from my chair, hands shaking as I dialed 911. "My shed's on fire. Someone's burning it. Get to 14 Elm Street, Cedar Hollow now," I yelled into the phone, my voice breaking with panic. I grabbed my phone and raced downstairs, flinging the back door open to the yard. The fire had spread across the walls, black smoke billowing into the sky, the smell of burning wood choking me. Margaret stood a few steps away, her eyes gleaming in the firelight, like she was savoring the sight. I switched my phone to video mode, and shouted, "Margaret, what are you doing? Stop it now." She turned to me, flashing a cold smile. "Oh, Emily," she said, her voice saccharine enough to turn my stomach. "This shed's a community hazard. I have full HOA authority to deal with it." I couldn't believe what she'd just said. "Full authority? You're burning my house and calling it authority?" I roared, still holding the phone to record. The flames had swallowed the roof now, the sound of cracking wood booming like thunder. I wanted to rush over and drag her away, but the smoke was too thick, and I knew I couldn't do anything but wait for the fire department. Margaret didn't seem to care about me. She turned to two men from the truck, dressed in worker uniforms, looking confused and uneasy. "Dump the rest," she ordered, pointing at the leftover gas can. One shook his head, trying to say something, but she cut him off. "I'll pay you double. Do it now." They glanced at each other, then started backing away, clearly not wanting any part of this. My security cameras, the ones I'd installed since Margaret started harassing me, were catching it all. I'd set them to auto-record when the renovation began, and now they were capturing every detail. Margaret in her bright tracksuit, lighter in hand, her commanding voice cutting through the smoke. I heard fire truck sirens in the distance, but in that moment, I could only stand there, watching my shed, where I'd poured so much heart, go up in flames. Margaret didn't know she'd made a huge mistake. She was so focused on destroying it, that she missed three things. An unmarked police car parked a few houses down, my motion sensor floodlights snapping on as she stepped into the yard, and most importantly, she was standing right over a water line the crew had marked to fix after the shed was done. Right then a loud whoosh sounded, and water blasted up from under Margaret's feet, knocking her off balance. She toppled over, the lighter flying from her hand, water splashing all over her. The fire still raged, swallowing my shed, as fire truck sirens blared closer. I stood there still recording on my phone, black smoke stinging my nose, water from the busted pipe spraying across the yard. Margaret, drenched and smudged with ash, struggled to stand after her fall, but her eyes still burned with a strange arrogance. The two men from the truck hired to pour the gas had retreated near their vehicle, looking like they wanted to bolt. I yelled again, "Margaret, are you insane? This is my property." But she just laughed, that saccharine smile I'd heard a dozen times before. "Emily, I'm saving the neighborhood from your ugly shed," she said, her tone flat like she was reading an HOA announcement. Before I could respond, a figure stepped out from the alley behind the house, a police officer, his dark uniform stark against the streetlight. I recognized him as Officer Daniel Brooks, who often patrolled the area at night. He must have seen the flames from afar and come to check. He approached, hand resting lightly on his holster, voice calm but firm. "What's going on here?" he asked, glancing from the blaze to Margaret, then to me. I rushed over, still gripping my phone. "Officer Brooks, she burned my shed." I've got video. I rewound the security footage on the app, showing him Margaret pouring gas and lighting it up. Margaret turned to him, instantly shifting her tone. She straightened up, though water still dripped from her pricey tracksuit, and gave him her sweetest smile yet. "Officer, thank you for coming," she said, her voice soft like she was offering him tea. "I'm Margaret Voss, Cedar Hollow HOA president. This shed was declared a community hazard by the board. I'm just carrying out an emergency order to remove it." She dug into her pocket, pulling out a crumpled paper and handing it to him like it was undeniable proof. Officer Brooks took the paper, shining his flashlight on it. I craned my neck to see. It was just an old HOA meeting note, with a few scribbled lines in ballpoint pen at the corner. He frowned, voice still steady. "Ma'am, this is just a note, not a legal order to destroy someone's property, especially in the middle of the night." He turned to me. "You said you have video." I nodded, showing him the footage from both the security cameras and my phone. It was crystal clear. Margaret pouring gas, striking the lighter, ordering the two men to dump the rest. I saw her shoulders stiffen as her own voice echoed from the phone speaker. The two men from the truck had backed fully to their vehicle now, one stammering. "We didn't know this was illegal," she said. "Just pour the gas and leave." Officer Brooks raised a hand to keep them there. "You all need to stay put. I'll need statements from both of you." He turned back to Margaret, his gaze sharper. "Miss Voss, I need your ID, and a clear explanation of this." But Margaret didn't flinch. She crossed her arms, water still running from her wet hair down her face, and spoke with total confidence. "This is an internal community matter. You have no jurisdiction here." She even stomped her foot, splashing water around her, a move I'd later find hilarious if my shed weren't burning to ash. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. "No jurisdiction? You burned my house, Margaret. You think this is a game?" I pointed at the fire, tears welling up from anger and heartbreak. Officer Brooks held up a hand to stop me, his voice still calm but firmer. "Miss Voss, intentionally burning someone's property can constitute arson and vandalism. This isn't internal anymore. It's criminal. I need your cooperation right now." Just then, the fire truck roared up, red lights flashing across the neighborhood. Firefighters jumped out, dragging hoses to douse the blaze, but I knew my shed was beyond saving. Margaret wouldn't give up. She pulled out her phone, hands trembling from the cold and wet, and started typing. "This is just a misunderstanding," she said, her voice pitching high. "I'm contacting the HOA's lawyer right now." Officer Brooks raised an eyebrow. "At midnight?" he asked. But she didn't answer, just kept tapping. I stood there, staring at the smoldering ruins of my shed, where I dreamed of quiet work hours, and felt a rage I'd never known. But I also knew, thanks to the cameras, and Officer Brooks being there, Margaret couldn't slip away easily. When the firefighters put out the flames, my backyard was just a soggy pile of ash, smoke still rising from charred wood scraps. Officer Daniel Brooks was still talking to Margaret Voss, jotting down her statement, while the two men from the truck huddled by their vehicle, looking like they wanted to vanish. I stood there, still clutching my phone, anger and grief mixing in my chest. The fire truck sirens had woken the whole neighborhood, and now neighbors were gathering on Elm Street, pajamas rumpled, eyes bleary, but curious. I saw Henry Sullivan, the kind old man from the HOA board, shuffle over, his worn slippers slapping the pavement. "Emily, what happened?" he asked, eyes wide as he took in the wreckage. "Margaret burned my shed," I said, my voice hoarse from smoke and emotion. "I've got video." She poured gas and lit it. Henry shook his head, his face a mix of shock and fury. "I knew she didn't like you, but this is too far." Across the street, Clara Nguyen, another neighbor I rarely talked to, stood with her arms crossed, eyeing Margaret suspiciously. I'd heard Clara praise Margaret for keeping the neighborhood in line, so I wasn't sure whose side she'd take. But when Margaret started yelling at Officer Brooks, "This is an HOA internal matter. I'm protecting property values," I saw Clara frown, like she was rethinking everything. More neighbors edged closer. Some whispered to each other, pointing at Margaret, who now looked pathetic with wet, matted hair and a filthy tracksuit. I heard old lady Elsie from down the street say loudly, "I've lived here 40 years and never seen anyone this crazy." Margaret tried to rally them, turning to the crowd with a forced smile. "Everyone, Emily's shed was a hazard. I did this for the common good, but no one bought it." Henry stepped forward, his voice stern. "Margaret, you don't get to destroy someone's property on your own. That's not how the HOA works." I felt the air shift. Margaret was losing the support she'd once had. I knew I had to act fast. While Officer Brooks pulled Margaret aside for more questions, I opened my phone and sent the security camera video to Henry and the other 3 HOA board members, Clara, Tom and Lisa. I typed a quick note. Margaret burned my shed last night. We need an emergency meeting. Henry read it right there, his eyes lighting up. You're right, Emily. We've got to handle this now. He called the others, and within minutes, they agreed to an emergency meeting the next morning at the common room. I felt a spark of hope, even though my heart still sank looking at the shed's remains. As the crowd thinned out, I went back to talk to Officer Brooks. He told me Margaret would be held for further investigation, and that I should keep the video as evidence. She could face serious charges, he said, his tone low. I nodded, thanked him, then glanced at Margaret. She was in the police car, still tapping on her phone, probably texting someone to fix the misunderstanding. But I didn't care anymore. I had proof, and I wouldn't let her off easy. The next morning I went to the common room with Henry. Clara, Tom, and Lisa were there, but Margaret didn't show. She texted Henry. She had urgent business. I wasn't surprised. When the meeting started, I stood up, recounting the whole story. The harassing letters, the times Margaret stalked me, the shed burning last night. I played the video from my phone, letting the room see Margaret pouring gas, lighting it, and shouting about HOA rights. Whispers filled the air. Clara covered her mouth. Tom shook his head, and Lisa blurted, "Is she insane?" Henry picked up the HOA handbook, flipping through pages. "I don't see any rule letting someone destroy property," he said. "But I noticed Margaret's copy is thicker than ours. She bragged it was a president's edition with secret changes." I remembered her clutching that hefty book when I confronted her. I'd suspected something then, but now it was clear she'd added rules for herself. The board agreed to check her documents, and I suggested reporting the discrepancies to the police. As the meeting ended, Clara approached me, her voice soft. "I'm sorry, Emily. I didn't think she'd do this." I nodded, feeling a bit lighter. After the emergency meeting, I felt a glimmer of hope. Henry Sullivan and the HOA board members agreed Margaret's actions couldn't be ignored. I needed to understand why she'd gone so far. Burning my shed wasn't just personal spite, it felt like there was a bigger motive behind it. I decided to work closely with Officer Daniel Brooks and get the truth out. What happened next went beyond anything I could have imagined. Turning this from a neighborhood spat into a conspiracy Cedar Hollow never saw coming. I started by meeting my lawyer, an old friend named Rachel. The next morning, I brought everything. The security camera video, Margaret's harassing letters, photos of her white SUV parked outside my house, and notes from the HOA meeting. Rachel went through it all, her face shifting from concern to surprise, then finally a subtle smile. "Emily," she said, setting the video down. "I don't say this often, but this isn't just harassment. She burned your shed. That's arson. We should contact the DA's office right away." I nodded, a mix of relief and tension washing over me. If Margaret was going to pay, I wanted to make sure she couldn't wiggle out. While Rachel reached out to the prosecutor, Officer Brooks called with new info. "We found Margaret's fingerprints on the gas can at the scene," he said over the phone. "She claims it was an HOA emergency action, but there's no paperwork to back it up. We're holding her for more questioning." I asked about the two men from the truck, and he said, "They say Margaret hired them in a rush call, paid double in cash to handle a problem. They didn't know it was private property." Anger flared up again. She hadn't just wrecked me, she dragged others into her mess. But the real bombshell came from Henry. He called me soon after, voice buzzing with excitement. "Emily, I checked the HOA accounts. Something's off. Margaret's been jacking up fines for dozens of residents over months, but the numbers don't match the official books." He sent me a spreadsheet he'd quietly tracked. Small fines like grass too tall or trash can misplaced, inflated 3-4 times over, with the extra cash missing from the communal fund. "I think she's funneling it somewhere," Henry said. "I've told the police." My heart raced. This wasn't just about my shed anymore. Officer Brooks moved fast. They searched Margaret's house, seizing her phone and computer. When I went to the station to add to my statement, he shared early findings. "We found texts between Margaret and a guy named Leonard Price," he said, showing me copies of a few. One read, "Harper's shed ruins the plan. Higher area value costs us tens of thousands more. Deal with it." Another from Leonard, "Drop Cedar Hollow's value 20% more. I'll buy it all." I was floored. Leonard Price, I recalled, was a notorious Oregon real estate developer, known for snagging struggling land cheap to build luxury condos. It all clicked. Margaret didn't just hate my shed, she was working with Leonard to deliberately tank Cedar Hollow's value. My new shed, with its gray roof and green walls, would boost the area's worth, messing up their scheme. They wanted the neighborhood to look rundown, forcing residents to sell low. The hiked-up fines Henry uncovered were part of it. Margaret used them to squeeze people financially, siphoning the excess to Leonard through a secret account. I asked Brooks, How long's she been at this? He shrugged. Maybe since she joined the HOA. We're digging deeper. Rachel called soon after, confirming the DA's office was hooked. This isn't just arson, she said. They suspect fraud and organized conspiracy, crossing county lines. The FBI might step in. My head spun from a burned shed. I'd accidentally exposed something massive. As I left the station, I glimpsed Margaret through the interrogation room glass, still smug despite the cuffs. I went home, sitting amid the backyard chaos, staring at the shed's ashes. But this time, I didn't just see loss. I saw power. With the camera footage, Henry's help, and the expanding investigation, I knew Margaret couldn't escape. Once Margaret's conspiracy was exposed, everything unfolded like a storm. The district attorney's office officially charged her with multiple counts: arson, fraud, and organized conspiracy, based on evidence from my security camera footage, fingerprints on the gas can, and texts with Leonard Price that the police uncovered. Leonard, to lighten his own punishment, agreed to testify against her, handing over additional emails and financial records, proving they'd collaborated to devalue Cedar Hollow. I knew I'd have to testify in court, and though it was nerve-wracking, I also felt relieved. Justice was finally within reach. Margaret may have burned my shed, but she couldn't burn the truth. The trial took place at the district courthouse, a cold gray brick building a few miles from Cedar Hollow. I arrived early, sitting next to my lawyer Rachel, clutching a copy of the video I'd watched dozens of times. When Margaret walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. No more pricey tracksuit or saccharine smile, just a plain gray suit and tied back hair, though her eyes still radiated arrogance, like she believed she could wriggle out of this. She glanced at me, lips pressed tight, and I knew she felt no remorse. The prosecutor started by showing the security camera footage. Margaret pouring gas, lighting it, yelling about HOA rights, displayed crystal clear on a big screen. Murmurs rose from the gallery, where a few Cedar Hollow neighbors, including Henry Sullivan, sat watching. Margaret's lawyer, a short man with round glasses, tried to defend her. "Your Honor, my client acted in the community's interest," he said smoothly. Harper's shed was a potential hazard, old wood, fire unsafe. Miss Voss just wanted to protect the neighborhood. I nearly laughed at the absurdity. The prosecutor countered, calling me to the stand. I recounted everything. The harassing letters, Margaret stalking the crew, and the night she torched my shed. I followed HOA rules, I said, voice shaky but firm. She had no right to destroy my property, and the video proves it. The prosecutor replayed the footage, pointing out every detail, fingerprints on the gas can, Margaret's orders to her hires, and I saw her face pale. Leonard Price testified next. A middle-aged man with silver hair and an expensive suit. He said Margaret contacted him right after becoming HOA president. She offered to lower Cedar Hollow's value so I could buy the land cheap. Build condos, he said evenly. Harper's shed was the problem. It made the area look worth more. The prosecutor showed their texts, including Margaret's handle the shed. I want it gone. The courtroom went silent, only the rustle of papers, as the jury reviewed the evidence. Margaret took the stand too, and I wasn't surprised she tried to stay confident. "I just wanted to protect the neighborhood," she said, voice shrill. Emily Harper ruined Cedar Hollow's traditional charm, with that garish green shed. But when asked about HOA fines and the secret account, she stammered. That was an accounting error. Not me." The jury wasn't convinced. I saw some shake their heads as she sat down. After 3 days of arguments, they returned with a verdict guilty on all 3 counts. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair, read the sentence. "Margaret Voss, your actions weren't just personal destruction, but a systematic conspiracy against an entire community. I sentence you to 7 years in prison, a $50,000 fine, and restitution to Emily Harper and other residents affected by your fraudulent acts." At 7 years, Margaret's smug smile vanished. She turned to her lawyer, whispering frantically, but he just shook his head. I saw her shoulders slump, the first time she looked truly small. The trial drew local press, a reporter dubbed it Scorchgate, and I saw Margaret's face on the Cedar Hollow Times front page under HOA President. Faces 7 years for arson and fraud. Leonard got off lighter, 2 years probation and a fine, thanks to cooperating. Leaving the courthouse, Henry patted my shoulder. "You did great, Emily. She deserved it." I nodded, feeling relief mixed with exhaustion. Margaret was behind bars, and I felt like a massive weight had lifted. My backyard was still a soggy pile of ashes, but her sentence, 7 years, fines and restitution, gave me a chance to start over. The shed was gone, but I'd rebuild it, and this time I wouldn't do it alone. Cedar Hollow had changed after the ordeal, and what happened next proved a community's strength when free from someone like Margaret. I started rebuilding right after getting Margaret's restitution money. I called back the old crew who'd done the gray roof and green paint before it all fell apart. They agreed to return at a discount, saying they felt bad for not saving the shed that night. But this time, I didn't just have them. Henry Sullivan showed up with a handsaw and a box of nails, insisting on helping frame it. "You deserve this place back, Emily," he said, his warm smile touching me. Clara Nguyen, who doubted me because she trusted Margaret, came too, bringing a tray of cookies and a sincere apology. "I was wrong not to side with you sooner," she said, and I nodded, accepting her olive branch. Other neighbors pitched in. Tom from the board brought recycled wood from his stash, and Elsie, the 80-year-old from down the street, sent her grandson to help paint. I picked the same soft green, Margaret's too modern shade, and installed big windows like I'd planned. The new shed wasn't just my workshop, it became a Cedar Hollow group project. While painting, Henry suggested, "Why not make it a shared space? You do art, I could teach kids woodworking." I loved the idea, and so the new shed was born, half my studio, half community hub. While I was busy rebuilding, the HOA got an overhaul too. With Margaret gone, the board held an election for a new president. Henry nominated Clara, and I backed her instantly. Clara had been swayed by Margaret once, but after this, she changed, fairer, more attentive. She won in a landslide, and her first act was tearing up Margaret's secret amendment President's Edition handbook. "We need transparent rules," she declared at her first meeting as chair. She set up a committee to review all fines, demanded financial records be public to residents, and ensured no one could act rogue like Margaret again. I sat in the back row, smiling as Cedar Hollow finally got an HOA truly for the people. The shed was finished in a few weeks. The gray roof gleamed, soft green walls stood out in the backyard, and big windows let sunlight pour in like I'd always dreamed. To celebrate, I threw a small opening party in my yard. Neighbors brought food, Clara's cookies, Tom's grilled meat, Elsie's big lemonade pitcher. Kids ran around the shed laughing, while adults chatted under the pine trees. Henry raised his lemonade glass, saying loud, "To Emily," who reminded us sometimes you have to fight to keep what's good. Everyone clapped, and I felt tears roll, not from sadness, but joy. Someone, I think Elsie's grandson, suggested a little plaque out front to mark the occasion. We laughed and came up with "This shed survived fire and a Karen." So did we. I carved it myself from an oak scrap, nailed it by the door, and smiled every time I saw it. Margaret may have burned the old shed, but she accidentally helped us build something better, not just a structure, but the unity Cedar Hollow had lost long ago. As the party wound down, I stood in the new shed, watching the sunset glow through the windows. It wasn't just my studio anymore, it was a symbol of change. With Clara leading the HOA and neighbors by my side, I knew Cedar Hollow would never slide back into the dark days under Margaret's grip. The new shed's now central to my life in Cedar Hollow. Every morning, I step inside, fire up the saw, and let the smell of fresh wood guide me through peaceful work hours. Sunlight streams through the big windows, hitting the soft green walls, and I feel at ease, a feeling Margaret Voss once tried to steal. The security cameras still run, red lights blinking in the yard's corner, but now they only catch happy moments. Kids playing, Henry teaching them to carve, or Clara dropping off cookies to share. I keep them on, not out of fear, but to remind myself that sometimes being prepared can change everything. I heard about Margaret from a friend who works at the county jail. She's not adjusting well to life behind bars, tried organizing a prisoner council to control mealtimes, but got shut down fast. Inmates call her HOA Karen now, and I couldn't help laughing, picturing her without her white SUV or iPad, just an orange jumpsuit, and a scowl. She thought she was untouchable. But now she's just a punchline. I don't gloat over her misery. I'm not that type, but I admit, knowing she can't hurt anyone anymore brings a bit of satisfaction every time I walk into the shed. Margaret may have torched my dream, but she accidentally helped Cedar Hollow rediscover itself, a united community, no longer ruled by selfishness. I smile every time I see the plaque. This shed survived fire and a Karen, knowing the real win wasn't just rebuilding, but making everything better. And as I sand a new log, I get it. Sometimes, the best revenge is living well, with the shed, the neighbors, and myself. The story of Emily Harper and Margaret Voss mirrors real issues in the US today, especially in suburban spots like Cedar Hollow, where homeowners associations, HOAs, often matter but can get abused. Margaret, obsessed with control and scheming with Leonard Price to tank the neighborhood's value, stands for those who misuse small power for gain, a thing not rare in communities where personal and collective interests clash. Emily's journey sticking to the rules, using security cameras to protect herself, teaming up with neighbors like Henry and Clara, shows the power of transparency and unity in modern America, where tech and community can tackle injustice. The lesson here's practical in today's America, facing overreach, whether from a neighborhood Karen or a bigger system, always have proof and seek support. Emily won because she had camera footage, like how Americans now use phones to record wrongs, from petty disputes to big stuff like discrimination. Plus, rebuilding the shed with neighbors' help and revamping the HOA with Clara highlight that, in a country big on individualism, like the US, real strength comes from connecting and fighting for what's right. Don't let Margaret's hold you back. Stand up, document the truth, and trust your community, because that's how you turn setbacks into lasting wins. If you like the story of how I faced off with Margaret and rebuilt the shed from ashes, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next wild neighborhood drama. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video to dig into more Cedar Hollow backstage secrets.